They say gray hair is a crown of glory, but some days it feels more like an invisibility cloak. Isn't it funny? The Bible calls old age honorable, yet our culture treats it like a weakness. This isn't just me venting. It's a spiritual and social question about whether age should silence us or give us a deeper voice. So, does anyone really want to hear from a middle aged man anymore? Or am I talking to an empty room? That thought hit me in a real way not long ago, and it still lingers in my mind. The moment that drove it home for me happened in a meeting room. I was sitting at a long conference table tossing out an idea I thought could actually help. A few minutes later, the new guy said nearly the same thing, and suddenly heads were nodding all around the room. It wasn't anger that hit me. It was quieter than that, like the air slipping out of a balloon. After years of late nights, training new staff, and pulling teams through tight squeezes, I realized my words were still being heard but no longer taken in. That's when the mental questions start showing up. You catch yourself wondering if people see you as someone past his moment, if the steady hand you've developed in your 40s or 50s no longer looks sharp enough to them. The irony is, these are the years when you finally know what to watch out for. You can read the warning signs before the fire even starts. And yet, the very experience that should be your strength often gets you branded as overqualified, or the slightly softer version, too experienced. Both often function as polite ways to shut down experience. Surveys of workers over 50 show many report subtle age discrimination at work, being passed over for promotions, training, or leadership roles. That helps explain why a moment in a conference room can feel so telling. AARP and other workplace studies confirm this pattern. Older workers frequently sense their chances narrowing even when their performance is strong. What it looks like on the ground isn't usually someone being shown the door in a dramatic scene. More often, it's roles that quietly never open to you anymore, career tracks that stall, or the strange experience of hearing your own advice celebrated only when it comes from someone younger. I watched it happen to my friend Mark, too. He had a stellar record, years of mentoring behind him, and plenty of skill to lead. But when his company reorganized instead of the new leadership role he'd expected, he was offered a tidy transition package. The official line was they wanted to take the organization in a new direction. He was 51. That line may as well have been his expiration date, typed neatly onto official paperwork. He laughed in the moment, acted like he saw it coming, but it cut. Months later, the same job landed with someone a decade younger, with half the history Mark brought to the table. What sneaks in next is the harder part, the voice inside your own head. It shifts from saying, "They don't want me here," to whispering, "Maybe they're right. Maybe your best work is behind you. Maybe you should take their silence as confirmation." That's how rejection grows into something deeper. You absorb the no until you start serving it to yourself. And when the culture around you lifts up youth as the only standard of leadership, you begin to nod to that same message, even though you know the cost. That refusal of the call looks a lot like the spiritual temptation to trade our witness for the world's applause. It leaves you asking, should you keep raising your voice when you risk no one hearing, or should you stay quiet because silence feels safer? That's a real crossroads for faith and purpose. The moment you see it, though, is also the moment something awakens in you. The recognition that the system is broken, but that you don't have to break with it. And maybe recovery doesn't mean shouting louder to compete with younger voices. Maybe it means remembering how older guides before us carried this same burden when their wisdom wasn't easily welcomed, which naturally raises the question, if scripture and history both lift up age as honorable, why does modern life so often treat getting older like a fade into the background? One thing that steadies me in all of this is remembering that we aren't the first generation to wrestle with how age is received. Ancient voices still speak with clarity about what years and experience actually mean. In Proverbs 16:31, gray hair is described as a crown of glory. Psalm 92:14 says the faithful will still bear fruit in old age. Both verses turn the years into a sign of strength, a life that deepens rather than withers. Scripture doesn't see age as background noise, it frames it as a gift. Luke 2:25-38 gives us one of the clearest examples, Simeon and Anna. older, faithful, waiting on God's promise. Simeon had been told he would not die before seeing the Messiah, and Anna had spent decades in the temple after the loss of her husband. Neither of them was young, ambitious, or chasing influence. Yet they were chosen to recognize and announce that the infant in Mary and Joseph's arms was the hope of Israel. They were steady voices in a restless world, entrusted with confirming that God's salvation had arrived. Compare that to the modern workplace. Stay in one role too long and you're seen as spent. Apply for something new and you're tagged as past your prime. Where the Bible names age as fruitful, companies often quietly count it as decline. Endurance, resilience, and perspective, the very qualities that ought to matter most, are the qualities our systems struggle to value. It's an upside-down picture compared to the one our faith hands us. Anna's part in Luke's story makes the contrast even sharper. She had no position, no platform, no visible power. What she had was persistence. She kept vigil at the temple, praying, fasting, watching. When the time came, she spoke about the child to all who were waiting for redemption. Her words mattered precisely because of her long practice of faithfulness. Her witness burned bright, not in spite of her years, but through them. And this isn't something lost entirely to the past. Many non-Western and traditional communities still recognize elders as the stabilizers of family and society. Their voices carry weight, not because of glamour or speed, but because they've seen cycles repeat and know how to endure through them. Grandparents in many households pass on tradition, raise grandchildren, and steady the rhythm of family life. Seen this way, age isn't a liability. It's the foundation on which younger generations build. I see it too in places close to home. There's a man at our church who never had a title, not a pastor, not a board member, not the leader of any big program. Yet when someone's marriage cracked or when someone feared losing their job, he was the one people called. You'd spot him in a quiet corner, listening, nodding, steadying others without needing to be noticed. No one asked him to give polished speeches. His authority came from endurance and faithfulness. He didn't disappear in age. He grew into the kind of presence younger people lean toward. That's the lesson we tend to overlook. The gift of older mentors isn't polish or perfection. It's endurance. It's perspective. Those who've weathered storms carry something no textbook can replicate. And that's why these ancient voices from Scripture and from our communities keep reminding us that age brings a kind of truth younger years can't yet hold. So what if our ancestors and our Scriptures show aging as strength? Then our job is to learn how to carry that voice forward, even when the room pushes back. If Simeon and Anna were the first to announce God's hope, what can we older folks announce today? That question isn't abstract. It cuts into how we face our own trials right now. What happens when the world starts labeling you as past your prime, yet deep down you still feel a call to lead? That's the tension many of us face in midlife. For years, I believed that if you showed up, worked hard, kept your word, and gave your best, then doors would always stay open. But the truth is, something shifts. The rules change. And all of a sudden, the obstacles don't just hit your career. They spill into relationships, community, and even how you carry yourself in everyday spaces. Career setbacks are often the loudest trials. You can pour decades into a company only to be told you've been restructured out. Then when you try to re-enter, it feels like the air has cooled. A resume that once proved your capability suddenly looks like unwanted baggage. You hear coded phrases, "We're looking for a different direction" or "a better fit," and you start to realize that fit often means younger. Losing work at 50 isn't like losing it at 30. At this age, it often shakes not just your finances, but that deep sense of identity many men tie to their role. Our culture often elevates novelty and youth, and when experience is set aside in favor of fresh faces, it leaves you questioning whether years of dedication still count. But many Christian writers remind us that calling doesn't expire at retirement or when titles disappear. Vocation is bigger than a paycheck. There's also the personal side of midlife that cuts quietly but deeply. Being without a partner at 50 feels different than it does at 25. Instead of being seen as open to possibilities, society often reads it as left behind, and that perception carries weight. Walking into a wedding reception as the single man in the room presses a spotlight you never asked for. You feel it even if no one mentions it, the sense that settled lives are the legitimate ones. Research supports this reality. Pew Research Center's 2019 and 2021 analyses show that a growing share of adults ages 25 to 54 are unpartnered, and that men in this stage without partners often fare worse in employment and earnings compared to partnered peers. Behind the statistics are lived moments where you stand quietly on the sidelines, wondering if your life tells the story others hoped you would. I think of my friend Steve. He's 52, a capable, intelligent man, but after losing his job and navigating a divorce, he moved back in with his parents. He didn't imagine it would last so long, and yet, every time we're in a group, I notice people tend to gloss over what he says, distracted instead by the surface detail of his living arrangement. It's not that his wisdom isn't real, it is, but the dismissiveness only reinforces his feeling of being unseen. The heavier battle isn't the lack of housing independence, but the way culture reads his situation, forgetting that trials leave scars, but also lessons worth hearing. For Gen X men in the workforce, this sense of being boxed in has become especially sharp, as reported in coverage of Gen X in the job market. Too old for the up and coming roles, too young for retirement, you end up feeling like you're standing in a hallway where no doors swing open. And while you're waiting, loud voices out there, political movements, online subcultures, try to recruit you. They say your voice matters, but only if it's fueled by anger, only if you rail against something loudly enough. That's a dangerous bargain because it shrinks your choices into just two: silence or resentment. Neither of those bring life. Both only close you off further from living out the wisdom you've gathered. Yet hope does find its way through. For some, recovery starts in simple steps, not dramatic ones. Choosing to move your body again, to walk or lift a weight, regains presence in yourself. Choosing a small group, a church gathering, a circle where you're known not for status but for your name, it begins to rebuild the dignity that gets lost in silence. Sometimes it means offering what you wish you'd received, mentoring someone younger, not to control them, but out of empathy. These aren't glossy fixes, but they carry surprising strength. And slowly, you see the trial differently. It isn't just about lost recognition or discarded titles. It's about reshaping what identity looks like at this stage of life. It's about moving wisdom and purpose into the center while letting go of applause or comparison charts. And that realization begins to shift the focus away from what's happening to you in the office or the dating world and closer to what's unfolding inside of you. That is where the hardest test begins to surface, the one no resume or relationship can shield you from. The ordeal shows up when the battle shifts from the outside world to the inside. It's not always about a boss overlooking you or a system passing you by. It's that late night moment when you're staring at the ceiling, trying to quiet the noise in your own head. You find yourself asking the heavy question, does my voice still matter? Every experience, every lesson you've carried feels like it could vanish with a whisper that says, maybe no one cares anymore. That kind of doubt sneaks in slow. You push through the day, talk to people, even share ideas. On the surface, it looks normal, but then the silence comes later, and the thought rises again. Maybe the world has moved on. Maybe there's no room left for what I bring. And once that idea settles in, it starts creeping into everything else: your confidence, your relationships, even your prayers. The danger of this isn't just discouragement, it's spiritual erosion. When you start to believe that age equals irrelevance, you sever yourself from the truth that God has built into your design. It's not just about work or status, it's about identity. I've been in rooms where younger voices spoke over the same point I had just made, and suddenly it was celebrated. The hardest part wasn't being overlooked, but realizing how quickly I was beginning to agree with that dismissal, letting it tell me I didn't belong. You see it in digital spaces too. Social media thrives on speed, youth, and newness. Endurance and patience don't trend well. It's like hearing the crowd cheer at the sprint race while the long distance runner passes unnoticed. When the structure of the culture doesn't echo back your presence, it's easy to conclude your voice fell silent. But here's the truth that matters: your worth isn't measured by applause or titles. It comes from being created in the image of God. And Scripture grounds this. Psalm 92:14 promises that the faithful will still bear fruit in old age. Titus 2 reminds older men and women to teach and guide those coming after them. Those aren't symbolic lines, they are assignments. That means your purpose does not expire and your presence carries weight that culture cannot erase. This is where the turning point comes in. Think of it as 3 steps. First, receive your God given worth. Second, reframe your identity around that truth. Third, re engage by offering that wisdom to others who need it. You don't need to wrestle it back from a corporation or prove it to an algorithm. You need to practice believing it and then act from it. That might look small, but it matters. Tonight, you could call one younger person just to ask how they're doing, or write a note of encouragement to someone older who feels forgotten. Simple actions become the practice of re engagement, and when that shift happens, something remarkable follows. You stop wasting energy trying to act like you're younger than you are. You stop apologizing for your years. Instead, you stand where you are with a different confidence. The years that once felt like a wall turn into a platform beneath your feet. What looked like the end of usefulness starts to reveal itself as the beginning of deeper purpose. That reward isn't loud. It's not always visible. It's the steady clarity that you are needed right here, right now. And once you walk in that, the pull to share it with others grows stronger. You realize you aren't the only one wrestling with these questions. Friends, co-workers, even people in your church are carrying the same whispers in the dark. The reward is not only personal freedom, but also the ability to hand that freedom forward, to remind others that what culture calls decline, God calls fruitfulness. And when you begin to live that out, something shifts, not just in you, but in the way you show up for the people around you. The journey doesn't end there, because discovering your value is one thing, but carrying it forward in community is where the path leads next, and that is where the meaning of age takes on its full weight. Aging isn't decline, it's a stage that opens space for voice, purpose, and fruitfulness. It's not about fading away, but about carrying years as evidence that you've lived, learned, and endured. Scripture promises that even in old age we can still bear fruit, Psalm 92:14, and that perspective matters more than ever. So here's my invitation. If you're over 50, mentor one younger person this week. If you're younger, ask one elder to share a story. Who over 50 in your life needs to be heard? Tag them or share their story in the comments below. Stay blessed by the best, friends.